What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Crypto Airborne in the house, dropping you guys the latest and greatest cryptocurrency news and updates. What is today? Today is February 16th, 2022, and welcome for another live VGX Heroes Twitter Spaces AMA by our education team. Should be a good show tonight. We're going to be doing the history of monies. You know, people used to take shells and stones and rocks. They used to trade that back and forth as a form of currency. So we're going to get into a little history of that. What does it mean type of thing and how it kind of relates to the macroeconomics of everything that's going on with the transition of fiat to Bitcoin to crypto, things like that. So hopefully it's a good show for you guys. But yeah, not wearing my hat, got a fresh haircut. So yeah, might look a little different to you guys. So jump right into a quick market overview before we start here in about 8 minutes. So let's get that started. All right, let me just refresh it right now. So market is up about 0.13% the last 24 hours. Bitcoin's at about 44,000 right now, only down about 0.42%. We got Ethereum down about 0.36%, sitting at $3,147. Binance coins only down about 0.32%. XRP's down only about 0.14%. Cardano's down about 1.45%, sitting at $1.09. Top gainers last 24 hours. We got Rally. Never heard of that, but it's crushing it up about 50%, sitting at 36 cents. Aventus up about 17%. MDT up 16%. Maple, Mirror Protocol, haven't heard of those ones. And finally, Kyber Network up about 8.48%, sitting at $2.30. Top losers the last 24 hours. We got UPI down about 11%. Shipping down about 7%. Clover Finance down about 6.82%, sitting at 41 cents. It is February 16th, 2022. And the national holidays we do have, it's National Almond Day, Do a Grouch a Favor Day, Elizabeth Paratrovic Day, I don't know who that is, Innovation Day, Makabuka Day, and Tim Tam Day. Must be some old candy. I've never had those. You guys ever have those before? Biscuits? Must be some type of like British thing. I don't know. Crypto bubbles last or top 100 coins. We got Dash up 8.2%. SafeMoon V2. I don't know what that is, unless they did something with their regular SafeMoon, but it's up 13.8%. Rally that I just previously had mentioned up about 50.6%, and Neo up about 12.2%, sitting at $25.48. Let's take a look at my favorites right now. See a red except for CKB, only up about 0.4%. Maddox up about 0.5%. And Luna up about 0.1%. Other than that, everything's down. StormX is down about 2.3%. Voyager is down about 2.7%, set at $1.90. And yeah, Elrond down about 1.6% on the day. Total crypto market cap. You know, TradingView always is a little bit lower, sitting about 1.95 trillion. But I still believe we are above let's see, we're at about $2.083 trillion, down about 1.1% the last 24 hours. Bitcoin dominance down a little bit from the last couple of days. We're sitting at about 42.62%. The Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index, we did go up 1 point. We're still neutral territory, whereas yesterday we were at a 51, only down a point. Last week we were neutral, and last month we were at extreme fear. So we're coming up a little bit on the Crypto Fear and Greed Index or Bitcoin. So who knows? It's good to see that we're still breaking out of this last couple of month downtrend that we had. All right. So like I've previously said, oops, I got my little drawing thing on there. But yeah, so Bitcoin's been in a downtrend since about the 5th of November. We broke out of that channel around the 24th of January. And now we're forming this new channel upwards, and we're just testing this trend line right here. We also have a cup and handle right here, which is pretty significant, pretty bullish. So, you know, we're still going up slowly but surely. We closed the daily, green. Not much from the previous day, but we bounced off this trend line right here, and we're forming a cup and handle. So that's bullish news for Bitcoin. And just a couple tweets from crypto Twitter here about the daily candle close. This guy's saying that nice looking higher low. Bitcoin closed tonight above the 50% mark on the previous candle. Now let's see another higher low, but throw in a higher high as for a bonus for tomorrow. The green wave is intact and showing zero interest in sucking air below the red EMA. So we got that little chart right there. Next, we got Bitcoin Ninja. It said Bitcoin came down to test the daily 55 EMA. Found support. Last time Bitcoin tested it 3 times and then broke below. Would this time be different? This new daily candle may have the answer to that. Overall, I'm looking for Bitcoin to come test the 47,000, 50,000 next level. So like you said, the 50 EMA or 55 EMA right here, we wick down below it. So, we're still above it, but that's his, prediction. And then last but not least, going back to this chart, it is a full moon tonight. And for you people out there that, are into the astrology thing with the full moons and the new moons and whatnot, historically, we usually pump into new moons and we dump into full moons. So if you guys check right here, we'll pump to a new moon here, which is what we did. And then we dump down to the full moon, pump into the new moon, dump down to the full moon, pump into new. So it's been pretty accurate the last couple of new moons and full moons we've had. And then for the last couple that we've had, the last two, we had the full moon here, pumped a little bit into it, midway in to the new moon. But, we still kept pumping through the new moon when we're historically supposed to dump. But we did dump a little bit right here. So we have the new moon going on here. And we got a cup and handle. We're following this trend line right here. So maybe we're going to see a nice pump to the upside within the next, couple days or a week or so. And then if you guys are into astrology, I would go follow Marin Altman. She's all into this. She just recently put out a video talking about the full moon. So play this quick 1 minute clip real quick about her prediction.
We are having a full moon on February 16th, and full moons are usually local bottoms. The lunar cycle has a great track record, but recently, such as cases where momentum changed, it was overridden naturally when larger macro momentum changed and we started to go back up. We usually dump into full moons and then start rising up out of them, which frankly might kind of be happening now given that we did a small downtrend, and now with the full moon within 24 hours, we're going back up again. I'm going to reevaluate tomorrow, but there's a good chance I do want to take some short-term long positions in crypto. If you buy high and it nukes and you have to sell low, do not blame me. I am taking short-term trades. And naturally, a lot of these altcoins look like really strong buys. The second half of February, I think, is primed for a short-term local uptrend. But remember to fucking take your profits. Do not blame me if you're stuck holding months down the line. Altcoins are not something that goes up forever. They will go up 100%, down 100%. I'm about to travel. I'm going to reassess tomorrow, but I think there's decent entries for longs. But do remember, a lot of the market is very spooked right now. We are having a full...
So yeah, that's kind of her prediction. She thinks we're going to do a continued uptrend short term for the end of this month based off her astrological predictions, and she has been right for a lot of her stuff, even based off a technical analysis that she doesn't really follow, but she's been actually more accurate than some people in TA. But yeah, that's what we got going so far. It's now 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the dot. Let's refresh it. So yeah, enjoy the show, guys. Feel free to make some comments down below. Smash that thumbs up button on your way in. Try to answer some questions along the way. So yeah, let's enjoy it, guys. Thank you.
What's up, everybody? Just give us a moment here as we get the panel assembled. Hope you're all doing well. Be just a moment. Everybody's coming in. Got Michael, Derek, Aldo, Frankie's coming up. Let's see, am I missing anybody? Send Obiwan a mic if he wants it.
I'm happy to help co-host as well.
All right, just sent that over.
I'm freaking hyped for tonight, guys. Hyped. I got my drink. It's story time. It's history time.
Hey Floki, what would yourself tell your 12-year-old self about being hyped for history class?
It all depends on your teacher. If you have a teacher that's a good storyteller, you're going to love it. And lucky for you guys, we got some great storytellers here tonight. But if you know your teacher's lame, I'd say get a good night rest because you'll probably fall asleep.
Good answer.
Got a lot of people coming in. Baroness, Shaft, Logan, AJAX, Jeb, Mr. Fantastic, Green Arrow, Bugs Bunny, Mr. Cartel. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Obi-Wan, what would your answer be?
You got me in the middle of retweeting the space to get more people on. I loved history. History and math are my favorite classes, so I was always pumped for a history lesson. And I even considered at one point being a history professor. It was something I was going to major in.
Yeah, one of my favorite classes in college was a history class, just because the teacher, I've never been so excited to learn about, religion and all that stuff. And he was dropping F-bombs. He was going, Jesus Christ, all the time in his stories, and it was hilarious.
I had to drop an econ class one time because the teacher was so hilarious. Like my best friend and I were just sitting in the back of the class. He was so animated, we just couldn't stop laughing. And one day we were laughing uncontrollably, and he got so mad he threw the chalk across the room at us. It was we had to drop. We could not be in that particular professor's. So,
couldn't hang, but yeah, I think we're good to go and get started. So I'll kick this off here. Welcome everybody to the VGX Heroes educational space. I believe this is episode 22 or 23 in total, but I think it's safe to say this is season 2, episode 3 of our progressive learning model that we've been building off for the past 2 weeks. Time preference week 1 and all these good money terms week 2 in the history of money. And here we are with, the ancient lesson of civilizations and different forms of money. And it's going to be a really, really fun show tonight. I'm no expert. I'm just like you guys, here to listen to a great story. I poured myself a drink. I got my snack. I'm ready to get into this. I suggest you guys do the same. And let's go around and meet the panel. Michael, let me start with you.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
So I think everybody knows me by now. I'm Michael. I'm an entrepreneur turned financial literacy advocate and enthusiast. So I enjoy helping people kind of come along for the ride and learn a lot of the things that you're not taught in school anymore. Because unfortunately, civics and financial literacy is fallen by the wayside and it's fallen off of most major curricula. So I pretty much take financial literacy in my spare time to adults, to kids, to anybody that'll listen, and just try to fill in the gaps where the education system has kind of left everybody behind.
Thank you, Michael. You might want to do a Obi-Wan.
Twitter is a little buggy today. Hard to get that mute button. But hi, everybody. I'm Obi-Wan. I am VGX Hero number 123, the Jedi Master who likes to take on the Padawans. And in my real life, I work in finance at a large corporation. And you'll often find me on the spaces. And feel free to drop me a question or follow if you like anything you hear.
Thank you, Master Jedi. And our new regular special guest, Derek. Why don't you say hi?
Hey there, folks. This is Derek Smith. I am currently working on a open source software project, which I call Sovereign Stack, and I'm organizing a Bitcoin meetup here in the North Florida area, Jacksonville and St. Augustine. It's called Old City Bitcoiners, and if anyone is interested, come on out. We actually have a meetup tomorrow night in St. Augustine. And I'm just, basically a Bitcoiner. I love Bitcoin and I'm here to advocate for it. And I'm super interested in monetary history and anything regarding money. So I'm excited to join this panel and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Derek. And it looks like Ross accepted the mic and jumps the queue. So we'll go to you, Ross. Why don't you say hello to everybody?
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, so I'm basically a government drone, work in the public sector, but I also teach psychology, and I have a long time interest in behavioral finance in particular. So that's kind of my area of expertise and the whole market psychology. But tonight's topic is definitely something that interests me as well, because history was definitely one of my favorite topics growing up, and this kind of the advent of money as a unit of exchange. How that came about, because I mean, it's pretty unique to humans. That's something I was anxious to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Ross. Aldo, the Apache, the Scalper, say what's up.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, I'm Aldo the Apache, AJAX hero, and I've my background is I'm a linguist by trade and crypto enthusiast. So I am very happy to be here and be a part of the VGX hero community, and I look forward to this discussion on the history of money.
Thank you, Aldo.
Aldo,
Frankie.
Aldo, Hero of the Week, Apache, no less.
That is absolutely right. Well deserved, man. Definitely a leader in our community and appreciated for your presence and your contributions and just being yourself with all of us. It's really awesome. More than happy to celebrate you.
Much appreciated, y'all.
And Frankie, aka Jack Nicholson. What's up, man?
Hey, Floki, what's up? Jack Nicholson here with current events. When I'm not doing current events for the VGX Heroes group, I'm working a larger financial institution for my day job and what gets the bills paid. But hopefully one day that will be a thing of the past. So yeah, I think tonight's going to be exciting. A lot of the current events are going to lead into some fun discussions with Aldo and all. So I can't wait to get in.
Right on. Thank you, sir. And let's just give a brief shout out to the man behind the mask. Sun Tzu, why don't you say hi?
Hello, everybody. I'm Sun Tzu. I do a lot of the social media work for the heroes and mostly here to listen to all these smart people talk. So, you probably won't hear much from me, but I am intently listening.
Thanks, man, for all that you do. And I am VGX Floki, the boat builder, the Viking who speaks from the heart and that is drinking a Maker's right now and ready to enjoy the story. Before we hand things off and officially get started, let me remind you guys that this is being recorded on Crypto Airborne's YouTube and will be released later. So you could always re-listen to the good stuff. Thank you, Crypto Airborne, for all that you do. And that little blue button on the bottom right corner on your phone, go ahead and hit that. And let's remind everybody that it's about to go down and it's story time. It's history time. But let's get started with the weekly recap. Frankie, take it away.
Yeah, so a lot of things going on this week. First, with the backdrop of what I was talking about last week with the Fed and being kind of in limbo, we saw just a kind of a continuation of that this week. We saw the odds of a 50 bip hike in March drop from around 70% early in the day today to just about 50% by close following the minutes. Bitcoin dropped this morning as it appeared that Russia was not in retreat. Then notably kind of just gained in the afternoon and wore on and the minutes dropped. With regards to Russia, when it comes to the scenario of being cut off from SWIFT, they've had some interesting comments about Bitcoin and crypto in generally, which led to a little bit of a pump on the Bitcoin. And then it seems there's just been generally a lot of posturing on both sides, with Russia possibly having a slight upper hand, given they're probably the largest supplier of oil to Europe. So you could see kind of the noose tightening and loosening with their the situation with delivering oil there. Brief overcap in oil. It's hit this week the highest it's hit in the last I'd say 4 or 5 years. I think it was close to $95 earlier. So yeah, we're going to be feeling that gas pump later this month. Also notably, Ethereum rallied today. Twitter had added the cryptocurrency to its tips feature, and now the big news, and I can't wait to get into this discussion, is Canada and what we see there with Justin Trudeau, with cutting off finance to the truckers and any of the protesters that have been in Ottawa. So with that, let's Floki, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Aldo. Excuse me, Frankie. We're about to pass it to Aldo to do the Canada segment, but if there's anyone else that wants to take a moment and step up to talk about anything else they feel is worthy of a weekly recap or talking point real quick, please do so. Going once. Going twice. Aldo, get ready.
Razzlecon may fail.
What else? What else we got? Any other good tidbits? Keep it going. We're keeping it loose tonight.
I've had a one-track mind.
We got two coming up. Let's see here. We'll start with AJAX. Let's see here. Sorry if that was a little loud. My bad. Add a speaker. AJAX. It's calling. Oh, it's his freaking birthday. That's an event. A weekly event noteworthy. Can we get a happy birthday and some 100s for my boy
happy
AJAX?
birthday. Hope you had some.
Happy birthday, AJAX.
You get some good spuds tonight?
Got that right. Going out for dinner and eating some serious spuds.
There you
That's
go.
all I had. Thanks so much, guys. Love the VGX heroes.
Love you, buddy. Always a pleasure seeing your posts. Top tier poster. The ultimate shit poster, I have to say. King of shit posts. The best. The best. Always brightens our day. DeFi Z. Let's see what's the right Zilla. DeFi Zealot. What's going on, buddy? Oh, he out. All right, moving on.
He gone.
We're going. Aldo it is.
Okay, thanks, Floki and Michael. So I'm just going to give a brief synopsis of the Canada situation and how it applies to crypto. All right, so on 14 February, Prime Minister Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act specifically targeting banks, crowdfunding providers, and cryptocurrency exchanges in Canada that were enabling transfers to the truckers and supporters of the truckers. So that took place, and the outcome has been for the banks. I'm going to go over each one of these categories: banks, crowdfunding, and centralized exchanges. So for the banks, they have been authorized by the government in Canada to freeze all accounts without legal authorization. So they don't have to go through any of the normal due process to freeze someone's accounts. They have just been given this ability to freeze the accounts of anyone that is donating to these truckers and the truckers themselves. Regarding also, they're required to report relationships with people involved in the blockades as well. Regarding the crowdfunding, it's pretty much the same for each of these. They're going after the funding. So GoFundMe cooperated with the Canadian officials and has, at this point, has refunded the donors. However, GiveSendGo, which is a crowdfunding platform in Canada, they did the same, but they experienced an information leak. So when they gave all the user data to the government, that was actually compromised and hacked or leaked. And all of the information of those donors has been doxed now. So what you're seeing in that situation is not only were the funds effectively frozen, you're seeing now that the donors that donated and their information was doxed, now they are suffering repercussions. Specifically, I have one case here that I found where an entrepreneur that owns a gelato cafe was forced to close Tuesday after receiving threats when her name appeared on the hacked list of GiveSendGo. So that is another outcome of this as well. Additionally, the government of Canada has contacted all centralized exchanges, Coinbase, Kraken, and all the others that are allowed to operate or that operate in Canada, asking or essentially demanding that they freeze the wallet addresses and accounts of anybody associated with the protests as well. And they do have a list of over 30 wallets. I think it's like in excess of 30 wallets right now that they have identified as being associated with this protest, and they are freezing those accounts as well. So that's what's going on in Canada. And I have one other example in recent history where capital controls were imposed, albeit for different reasons. This goes back to 2013 when Cypress had the famous haircut, the bank haircut that took place in 2013. And essentially what happened was Cypress was getting bailed out by Eurogroup. And what happened was, as a part of that, they imposed austerity. And so all deposits in Laiki Bank over 100,000 euros was confiscated. So all of that was just gone. In the Bank of Cyprus, 47.5% of all deposits over 100,000 euros were also confiscated. So that led to a sum total of 7.7 billion euros lost. And that was never recovered. So capital controls are real. They occur. It's not something that happens in some far off third world, land. They happen all the time, or often in the West. So this is something to be aware of, and they can happen for a multitude of reasons. So what's the solution? Obviously, we're all in crypto, so we understand the benefits of decentralization. The problem here is, in my view, is you have centralization. You know, these banks are the single point of failure. They control all your finances and they control your personal information, and they can give that up to the government whenever they're compelled to do so or coerced to do so. So, and there are other issues as well in terms of not just, you know, not in addition to financial. I mean, in the case of the entrepreneur in Canada that donated, uh, she's had to close her business now because now she's getting death threats. Okay, because of her personal information being doxxed. So it goes beyond just your financial information or your access to your finances as well. So the solution is decentralization and self custody. In a situation like this, obviously, you want to get your crypto off centralized exchanges if you haven't already done so, and you want to get them into hot or cold self custody wallets, and then operate on decentralized exchanges. Um, we you know, I love Voyager. It's a centralized platform. Centralized platforms have a lot of benefits and upsides, but the reality is, in times of social unrest, the government can coerce them, and they will target them and force them to give up your information. So centralization is an attack vector that will be exploited, and you know, all crypto investors need to be aware of that and need to just act accordingly. And just remember, you're in control of your data, your crypto, and your future. So, yeah, that's all I had to say on the Canadian piece.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly topical situation that's going on right now, and hopefully it should be an eye-opening one for a lot of people that are in the space that either treat it like a casino or don't necessarily have a reverence for what's under the hood and how to use it properly, and really, you know, we've discussed this in past weeks too, of understanding the ethos of Bitcoin and of decentralization and what it means to have permissionless money and censorship resistant money, and those who just kind of entered the space accidentally because there was a big hype going on, and you know, there's an opportunity to seek alpha. So I think that's incredibly important, and what comes with that is the need for people to understand and have a reverence for self-custody and proper OPSEC, and the reason to maintain a certain degree of anonymity in your spending history and protecting your, you know, UTXO management when you do start to self-custody Bitcoin and you start to understand the trail of breadcrumbs that you leave behind in your UTXO management. You know, these are all things that come into play. And as far as other topical ways that this is relevant going forward, you know, we've kind of debated whether or not to tackle this topic in these AMAs because we've always stayed apolitical. But without picking sides, left, right, or center, this is more of a statist and a tyrannical kind of conversation than a left or right, you know, breakdown across party lines. So what you don't like your enemy doing today, or what you like your friends doing today, possibly to your enemies, you won't like when the shoe's on the other foot and the other party is in power. So to me, whether you fall on the left or right side of the aisle, it really doesn't matter, because if you're currently on one side and, you know, not supporting what's going on, or you're supporting what's going on, so you're inclined to put your head in the sand and ignore it, just imagine the shoe's on the other foot and the other party's in power and they're doing something kind of equal but opposite in the other direction. So what are ways that could bite our society in the ass in the future? To me, my head immediately goes to CBDCs and this push for central bank digital currencies or digital cut bucks. So what could happen with that? You know, we haven't really touched upon this side of the space or the potential in these spaces, but a CBDC opens you up to social credit scores and censoring different expenditures. So imagine if all of your funding was digitally accessible and controllable by the state, and they were to deem what they chose ethically viable or inviable for you to spend your money on. You know, what if the ESG narrative were to completely take over and you started to have ESG-based adjustments to your social credit, or social credit adjusted based on things that you've said or done or opinions that you've held, that would dictate how much of your money you got to keep, where you got to spend it, how you got to use it. These are some of the perils and pitfalls of a digital currency. So they're going to get presented in a way as if it's presenting this matter of convenience, except there's a lot more that comes with it than just convenience. They're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart because they think it'll be more convenient for the citizens. It'll be more convenient for them to control what the citizens can and can't do. And there's no finer example than what's going on right now. I mean, they're exercising capital controls in Canada using the existing financial system. Imagine if it were fully digital and even easier to do so. You know, and there's some key players in the Bitcoin space that have really put their neck out there to do what they thought was right, just to maintain liberties in their country. And those guys being BTC Sessions, Jeff Booth, and Greg Foss. And all three of those guys, after GoFundMe and I think Give Send Go had been shut down and the funds weren't going to make it to the truckers, they basically set up the multi-sig recipients from Tallycoin so that Bitcoin would be, you know, censorship resistant and able to get those funds to the truckers. So those guys were holding the private keys to that multi-sig wallet, which then ultimately became a security risk for them and an OPSEC risk for them, because with Trudeau's overreach of using this emergency act, they essentially became at risk of being regarded terrorists and enemies of the state just for having done what they've done. So, you know, Aldo touched on the list that was leaked of the, I think, 32 addresses. It was like 28 Bitcoin and 2 ETH and a Monero or something along those lines, or I think a Cardano might have been mixed in there. But these guys, up until the point where they were holding the coins, imagine what their families were going through, where people, you know, just trying to stand up for a cause for, you know, not calling balls or strikes, but they're trying to support what is being deemed a peaceful protest, or what they believe to be a peaceful protest, and in so doing being deemed essentially criminals and enemies of the state and terrorists within their own country. It went from like zero to crazy extreme seemingly overnight in a way that I think that a lot of people didn't see coming. I doubt that those guys thought it would escalate to that, because they all went through a little bit of a freak out moment once Trudeau put this out, and they all kind of retreated a little bit from the public spotlight, and all three of them have handed over the keys to the multi-sig wallet to different parties that are not identified, that have remained anonymous. But there's so much thought-provoking content to come out of this situation that everybody should really keep in mind. So, you know, this is typically a Voyager-heavy platform, so people are here for yield, but there needs to be some consideration to, if this is the entirety of your net worth, what extent you should be considering self-custody and actually learning about the proper way to self-custody these assets.
Yeah, Michael, I just wanted to touch on one thing that you just mentioned. You're talking about it going from zero to crazy level overnight. The Emergency Act has only been invoked 3 times in Canada's history, and 2 of those were in World War I and during World War II. The third time was in the 1970s during the October crisis, when there was a premier that was kidnapped, and also a diplomat that was kidnapped. So this in 1970, that was the first time it was ever invoked at peacetime. So this is not something that is invoked lightly or leveraged lightly. And so if you look at how it was applied in the past, only in wartime, and then in this extreme situation where you have, you know, a minister and a diplomat who were kidnapped, and then if you fast forward to today and you look at, like, okay, proportionality of action, and what you know, our neighbor to the north and with similar value systems is willing to do, then that should be a wake-up call to everyone. I just wanted to add that.
Right. If everybody thinks that, oh, that can never happen here, I mean, I can't think of a more passive, peaceful place than Canada. It's like one giant country of Pleasantville. Everybody's super nice and respectful and friendly, and now they're like Aldo just said, and this was used in World War I, World War II, and then in another severe case of absolute necessity. And now they are invoking this because some trucks are honking horns. It seems a bit extreme, and I know that it impacts trade and there's blockades and all that, but there's been plenty of civil unrest for a number of other things. Nothing that's escalated to the point of deeming people terrorists and seizing assets and limiting the way that they can engage in any type of free enterprise system. It's a bit scary, and if you're not fully up to speed on the situation, I would suggest that everybody kind of look into it and realize that a lot of the things that you may think could never happen seem to be happening. So not that we're going full Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but there needs to be a level of understanding of what's happening right now and in what ways, everybody always says, well, Bitcoin fixes this. It's important that people understand the ways that really Bitcoin could fix or at least help mitigate a situation like this. At a point of anything tyrannical on behalf of a government, there is no like fix where, oh, this just makes it all better. But if it can mitigate your risk of censorship or asset seizure or things like that, or, this is a bit of an extreme because this is a political lightning rod over COVID mandates and vaccines and all that stuff that, has gotten everybody on both sides of the spectrum pretty on edge over the past couple of years. But the things that it could evolve into, especially if there were CBDCs issued by central banks, and then you got into governing credit scores, or even look at the ways that could be applied, like what Europe had to do with NERP, so negative rates, right? So you were actually paying for the privilege of keeping your money in a bank if you had it in a savings account in Europe for a period of time. If there was a CBDC in place, they could just decide that they were going to give everybody a haircut, just like they did in Cyprus, the haircut there. What if it was something that was sanctioned, voted on, and endorsed by the political powers that be at the time, and it just slowly, like a frog in boiling water, became normal? We currently already swallow so many pills that didn't exist, that really didn't have a basis for existing, whether it be income tax or sales tax or all these things that start out small and then incrementally turn into something much, much larger. You give the state the firepower of having CBDCs and no alternative to actually have a true, kind of representing gold or cash in hand. You think of the old timers that would like put cash in the mattress that nobody knew about. That completely goes away if you evolve to a completely digital CBDC kind of central bank tracked and monitored and manipulated currency. Just look at how they've manipulated actual printed fiat cash, and then think of how much easily they could do it if it was all just ones and zeros. It's a scary premise. So it's important for a lot of people to understand that the birth of Bitcoin really wasn't because of a hatred of the dollar, which I saw on another tweet storm that I ended up in today with another gentleman. But it was really because of all the central bank fuckery that was the catalyst for what we've come to know in the Bitcoin space and the problem that Bitcoin was intended to solve. So, Derek, do you have any thoughts on what's going on up in Canada? I know that you are pretty tuned in to tyranny and acts of the state and overreach of the state. So I'm curious to get your take on what's going on up there and how you see this playing out here. They have these addresses that they're tracking, and ways that people can mitigate that, or maybe some OPSEC recommendations.
I think Derek might be having some mic issues. Let's see if this works here.
Yeah, he messaged on Discord, said that the app crashed on him.
Yeah, he might be SOL. Before we travel back in time and cover the historical money stuff, I know, trust and manipulation of a centralized money system will be talked about related to today's topic in a week or two. So I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole, but I know, Obi-Wan, this subject is close to your heart. So if there's anything you want to add as well, or thoughts before we move on to Yap Island, let me know. What's up?
Yeah, I think Michael covered a lot of it. CBDCs, should they be enacted, and I hope that the proposal from one of the senators gets some consideration to ban them before they even begin. I've been on many sessions of Cefi or CFI, who's down here, and I like to repeat what he says, is that the CBDC is essentially one of the most evil things a government can inflict on its constituents and population, and in as many forms. And it's not a symbol of freedom for the reasons that Michael outlined, and it's what controlling states and closed states do, like what you see in North Korea and in China. And it is a weapon for evil. I will not participate in CBDCs, and if ever that they were forced upon us, would seek to convert them immediately into free private money as quickly as possible. So that's kind of the quick summary. I don't know if Derek came back, but yeah, I'm very much not a proponent of CBDCs, nor do I like centralized stablecoins either, because they're just the type of acts that are happening right now in Canada with this Emergencies Act. You know, they can, if what the government is currently proposing. There was recently, I believe yesterday, a proposed bill that would require stable coins to be held 100% in reserves via a bank. And they're trying to kind of pick and choose the winners of stablecoin issuance and control the flow of money and monetary policy through banks and keep the banks relevant. So guess who's probably proposing those bills be written, right? You don't have to think very hard on that one, right? The banks are. So that we should also be just as leery about that type of stable coin regulation as we are potentially a CBDC.
Yeah, I think if I could make one recommendation on the topic that spans CBDCs and self-custody and the importance thereof, and how to preserve one's anonymity and maintain privacy and self-custody in a safe and OPSEC positive way, I can't recommend enough that people look into Matt Odell and all the work that he's put out there. I retweeted a couple of his tweets. I'll try to pin here while we're doing the spaces that include beginner guides for how to self-custody and OPSEC, and watch his podcasts. And they do Tales from the Crypt is him and Marty Bent, who's big in the uncapped gas flare Bitcoin mining space, basically using otherwise would have been waste gas. But they do a fantastic show every week called the Rabbit Hole Recap. And Matt also does what's called Citadel Dispatch. I would highly recommend all those. Citadel Dispatch is very topical and covers different things from episode to episode, from self-custody and wallet options and spinning up a node and how to coin join, which coin join service to use, things like that. And then Rabbit Hole Recap is really just a good long show of those guys talking about current events and talking about the applications of different products and solutions in the space. And there's often talk in there about CBDCs, or as they call them, CBDCBs, because they refuse to refer to them as dollars. So for them, it's central bank digital cuck bucks and not central bank digital currencies. So
I'll have to come up with a new name from, instead of fiat, is Fed coins, Fed coupons. CBDCs will be. We'll have to come up with something creative for that one.
Yeah.
I heard one funny joke, since we're waiting for Derek. It looks like he's coming back, but I heard somebody call the International Monetary Fund as idiots mining fiat.
I like it. So Derek, sorry, I know you had some technical difficulties there with Twitter, and I know the space has been a little bit glitchy on our end here too, but I'm not sure how much you heard, but I'd be curious to get your take on what's going on in Canada, and then how you would apply that to kind of recommendations to people in the space that I think the majority of our audience would probably be on the novice side of self-custody, not to generalize and paint everybody with the same brush, but basically how you would introduce an audience to self-custody and effective ways at maintaining privacy, anonymity, and UTXO management, things like that.
Sure. Sorry about that. I was switching between apps, and Twitter does not like that apparently. So I'll stop doing that. But yeah, this Canada thing is pretty upsetting, and a lot of people are wondering around, like a lot of older people will be like, well, I don't even understand the point of Bitcoin. Like, what is the point of this thing? And with this whole Canada situation, I think it's becoming very clear. Bitcoin is, the main value proposition, I think, in Bitcoin is its censorship resistance. So you use Bitcoin when you absolutely have to. Now, of course, it's also got that number go up technology, so it's got that incentive mechanism to have voluntary adoption and so on. But when push comes to shove, and you can't transact, or you can't save, or you want to participate in a political movement that your government does not permit, Bitcoin is really your only option. And furthermore, if you try to reach back into the fiat system, sell your Bitcoin for fiat, that's problematic, and so it really does show that there's a need for this Bitcoin circular economy to emerge, and people need to, take note of that and try their best to get into Bitcoin and stay into Bitcoin and transact in Bitcoin. Now, with regard to self-custody, there's a number of things that I think we need to take away here. First of all, I love that there is a multi-sig that was set up. I think it needs to be larger than a 2 of 3, probably is what they set up. And I do agree that the co-signers of that multi-sig need to be to remain anonymous, because they open themselves up to state attack, obviously. And then, so I think I can't remember who mentioned, but during the intro, the Canadian government identified 32 quote wallets that they have blacklisted, basically. And what they mean by that is actually addresses. And so it's important, I think, that people need to understand is that we should never be reusing a Bitcoin address. Addresses should really only be used once. And you should use an automated system like BTC Pay Server or something like that, which generates a new address every time. There are other things like in Bitcoin, we just adopted the Taproot standard. Now it is pretty new, so it's not in wide usage, but the one nice thing about Taproot is all of the address types, or rather all of the script types look the same. So the government, the Canadian government, wouldn't necessarily be able to discriminate between a single sig address or a multi-sig address. And so like the policy, that is the, is it a 2 of 3 multi-sig or is it a 3 of 5 multi-sig or whatever, that's obscured from the actual address on chain. So if you send to that Taproot address, you don't know necessarily that it's a multi-sig. And that, adds a lot of power and privacy and censorship resistance, frankly, to the Bitcoin protocol in a lot of ways. And then, obviously, I mean, this gets repeated on every conversation. Don't leave your coins on an exchange. If you have your coins with any intermediary, be that a bank, an exchange, or any financial institution, those are, that's risk, basically, is when you don't have custody of those coins, you are introducing a risk. And Bitcoin, to me, in a lot of ways, is all about reducing your overall risk. And there's lots of ways to do that, and you should be pursuing them all.
I'm so glad you got your mic fixed, Eric. Seriously. What else? Any other thoughts to wrap up, or should we transition to, traveling back in time? I guess, Michael, I don't know if you want to do a quick kind of summary of the timeline we're about to go through, or if I should just ask Ross, how far back in time are we going? Where are we going? And what happened?
Yeah, so basically we've covered, this is our third scripted episode. So the first two, we covered time preference, and then we, last week we covered, what it is that makes money, the condition, basically the coincidence of time, space, scale, wants, the difference between barter and, direct exchange and then indirect exchange. So what gives something its moneyness? This week we get into some actual applications of money that came to be in history. So over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to start tonight with primitive forms of money, which I think, to me, out of all the history of money, the primitive forms are by far the most engaging, the most fascinating, and stories that I wish that I had heard younger and earlier on in my life. And then we will basically take you up into the point of the introduction of monetary metals tonight. And then next week we'll cover monetary metals, and then the week after that, we will dive into basically everything post Bretton Woods, and after the destruction and elimination of the gold standard in this current fiat experiment that we're currently suffering through at the moment. So with that being said, I'll kick it over to Ross here and give us, to me, our most fascinating example of a primitive money, which would be back on Yap Island. So take it away, Ross.
Okay, I appreciate it, and that was some great insight that everybody's already contributed, especially regarding self-custody and the whole situation with Canada. So I do appreciate that as well. So yeah, you know, last week talking about what makes money money, I think was definitely a good lead into the actual some of the history of money throughout time, and one of my favorite examples is the whole island of Yap and what's now known as Micronesia. So we're going back like about 500 AD. This little island had these huge limestones that they got from this quarry that wasn't native to the island. I mean, we're talking about huge stones that are, hundreds of tons as far as size. Obviously, not easily transportable and things of that nature. Well, the way they used this was essentially an agreed upon distributed ledger, one of the first historical examples of a true distributed ledger. And the way they did this is with the stones, they basically would agree upon value. And as they traded amongst the other people on the island, anytime there was some type of exchange, they would make an announcement to the entire island. Sometimes this was done, through public announcements. Sometimes it was done through marks on some of the stones. And in some cases, they could actually divide the stone. And once again, they would make an announcement and there would be an agreed upon value. And even though there might be some subjectivity in that, because there was this public announcement, everybody had this awareness of what the value would be for that time moving forward. Everybody had to keep track of this. So granted, some people might forget, but because there was other people on the island, hopefully everybody on the island could agree upon basically the same value over the course of time. It seems kind of crude, but this worked for centuries, until about 1800, 1870, I think it was, when an Irish American captain was sailing through the area and ended up shipwrecked. Well, the tribe on Yap Island ended up reviving him. And after they revived him, being the opportunistic shipwreckee, he realized that, oh wait, I can do some stuff with the coconuts that they have on this island. I can get them transported, coconut oil. Definitely I can make bank on this. Well, he ended up setting sail. I think he ended up landing in Hong Kong. Got a bunch of explosives. Got a bunch of technological tools to basically help him mine these rhinestones that had this immense value to the people on this particular island that had such a rich resource of these coconuts. So he couldn't take like the normal forms of exchange that he might use at sailing and doing the bartering and things of that nature. He had to use the rhinestones. And so when he got there, he ended up being able to actually get these rhinestones, but when he tried to pay the tribespeople there on the island, the chief wouldn't accept him. He told basically told the entire island to refuse him because they didn't have that value that was derived from the hard work it took to actually quarry these rhinestones. Well, once again, you got to keep in mind, there's going to be vectors that can be faulty. And lo and behold, there were some of the people on the island that did accept the faulty rye stones brought by Captain O'Keefe. So what does that mean? It means the debasement of the value of the rye stones. This was a distributed ledger that had persisted for centuries. And all it took was this technological breakthrough to almost immediately debase the currency that had been the livelihood for the monetary system for this island. This was just one example throughout time, and I'm sure as we go through the rest of the week, there's going to be other examples as far as how currency can be manipulated. But one of the more interesting takeaways, I think, from the Yap Islands is the technological advancement. That was a key factor in how quickly the debasement of the rye stones occurred. And I think that also kind of touches on the points that were mentioned by some of the panelists earlier, is about some of the risks of a central bank digital currency. It's a technological breakthrough, yes, but it does still provide a quicker means of debasing what we hope we're actually trying to maintain value of.
It just fascinates me, what they thought made those stones valuable, which was to them blood and sweat and energy and labor. And, based off of that belief, they see these other similar, well, it's the exact same thing, stones, except made the easy way from explosives. And because of that, they didn't value. But because they all didn't agree, it slowly fell apart. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and we'll see that over and over again throughout history too, where these primitive monies always tended to fail because there was some type of technological or outside influence that came in and made the increase in flow easier than before. One thing that resonated with me with the Yap Island stuff that really ties back to what Derek really hammered home last week was, none of these monies were just invented to be money. Nothing just came to be and this is going to be money for the purpose of being money. Everything was always attractive for some other reason. So like the Yap stone, the rye stones on Yap Island were already attractive because they were considered precious and desirable. So they had to be precious and desirable first, and then they served they kind of acquired a purpose as money. And we saw that later again in history too, with like the agri beads in West Africa. So West Africa had these agri beads that were like little glass beads that they thought might have been from meteorites or maybe came from like ancient Egyptians or Phoenicians. And it was in an area in Africa where they didn't have any glass making technology. So for them, they were precious. And then because they were precious and desirable, they became a monetary instrument. And at first they succeeded just like the rye stones did, because you had a high stock to flow. You had the quantity that you had. You really had no ability to introduce new ones, and they were saleable across time. They were small, they were valuable, they were saleable across scale because you had them in different sizes. You can make chains of them. You can include them in jewelry, which I know Derek will touch on in a bit, as far as how jewelry was later used. But they also were difficult to use because you had different sizes, so you didn't have anything standardized with it. And that's another area where later on in history we'll come to find that coinage, became was able to trump some of these primitive monies because you were able to have standardized unit sizes. But they were saleable across space. They were easy to move around. So the Yap Island stuff to me was fascinating because it really didn't need to move. And really, it was, as far as I think we should really circle back and just look at just how much inspiration that Yap Island system provided to Bitcoin.
It wasn't just that they didn't even have to move. There was an instance where they tried to move it and it ended up falling to the bottom of the ocean. But even though they no longer had it in their actual possession, they still agreed upon its value and still used it for exchange.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so much, because it was, even though it was so primitive and just so simple in nature, it still is very akin to what Bitcoin does today. So Bitcoin, Derek, you're probably by far the expert on the panel as far as the anatomy of the Bitcoin network, but you're not exactly moving Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin exists, and you're maybe transferring the ability to spend it, right? The who has the authorization to spend that Bitcoin. But to me, there are so many parallels between the Bitcoin network and the Yap Island Stones. It's fascinating how many parallels I saw when I first read and learned about Yap Island. Derek, would you be able to dive into a little bit of the anatomy of the Bitcoin network and parallels that you draw between it and that primitive form?
Sure. You know, the way I kind of look at money in general is that it's basically a decentralized ledger, right? And, you know, so if you think about the Yap Stones, you know, and whenever there was a transfer of some property, everyone would just discuss among themselves that, hey, there's been an update to the decentralized ledger, and sometimes they'd make a mark on the Yap Stone, or sometimes they'd physically move a stone, but most often they would just agree that this stone belonged to someone else. And, you know, with regard to Bitcoin and any other form of money, really, with Bitcoin, anytime you make a transaction, you're basically making an update to a database that says, hey, this money no longer belongs to me, and it belongs to someone else. Or more specifically, the money is encumbered in a script such that the owner of that script is the only authorized individual, or it could be a multi-sig that can, you know, make another state update. And so, you know, what's nice about that is you have an automated system that is able to make those updates rather than having to go around and gossip around the, you know, the island to make those updates. And not to mention, you know, you get a lot higher fidelity with regard to, you know, what everyone understands the state of the database to be. I think Ross mentioned earlier that not everyone would remember that, you know, a certain property transfer had occurred, but the majority of the population on the island did know that. So with Bitcoin, you have a much higher fidelity in that regard. And, you know, but you can look at other monies too, and they basically operate on that same premise. It's just you know, even gold, right? If you think of, you know, gold, you know, a gold coin is just, you can think of it as like a small UTXO that when you hand over to another individual, just by the act or the fact that they own or have physical possession of that bare asset, they are able to spend it later on down the road. And so it's acting as a decentralized ledger. So really, money is all decentralized ledger. Some monies are more decentralized than others, of course.
Yeah, and I think that the ultimate failure of the Stones as a monetary instrument came down to an erosion of stock to flow, and that's where, you know, I was starting to go with the agri-beads in Africa and a couple other examples I'd like to kind of walk through a minute. But ultimately, we see a pretty consistent repeat pattern throughout history that there's a ton of fascinating history as far as things that have been used as monetary instruments, but ultimately they all fell apart due to a complete erosion of stock to flow. And a lot of them also had ties to an erosion due to some type of a technological breakthrough that facilitated that failure of the currency. So, you know, the agri-beads that I was discussing that were super rare to the areas of Africa where they were being used, once the Europeans got there, the Europeans saw them and realized, wow, these people are valuing these things, but what do they have in Europe? I mean, Europe is, there are places throughout Europe that are known for their glass making abilities. You know, Venice comes to mind, personally being of an Italian background. You have Murano there, which is, you know, one of the foremost glass making places on the planet. And what were they able to do? You know, Europe produced glass beads in mass easily, and then introduced them into a spread out African population. They were able to do it, you know, incrementally in such a way that it was slower and more covert of a process. And in so doing, it had even bigger and more tragic consequences. So they basically scoured Africa and all of its resources and left it devoid of all of their resources for beads that ultimately cost them nothing, that they produced incredibly easily. And look at the results of Africa since the European arrival. They essentially turned their beads that they had that worked perfectly fine prior to the arrival of the Europeans from a hard money into a soft money, right? Hard money to easy money. And all of their wealth was ultimately transferred to the Europeans, you know, and much in the same way that I think in modern times, much of the African wealth is currently being transferred to the Chinese because they come in and they mine the resources from out from under them. But the Chinese manipulate their currency, and it's a completely, you know, false, to me, measure of accounting. But they come in and they could promise them the world because they're in control of a completely manipulated currency, and they mine all the resources out from under them. And ultimately, it's nowhere on the African continent do they really profit from the resources that they produce. They probably produce a fairly large percentage of the world's resources. So Derek, I see you've got your hand raised there. So before I go on to some of the other historical monetary systems, what do you got?
Yeah, I thought it might be relevant to mention the idea of unforgeable costliness. And this is an idea that was formulated by Nick Szabo, who's got a lot of very interesting writing in this area regarding monetary history and the origins of money and so on. But the idea of unforgeable costliness, it really goes back to, you know, how easy is it to increase the stock to flow. And as you mentioned, Michael, that really is kind of the determining factor in whether or not a money remains a money, is how stable is its stock to flow. And so, like, if something is going to serve as a monetary medium, it needs to have this property called unforgeable costliness. And that is it easy to forge or counterfeit, basically? In the case of the beads, it was extremely easy for the Europeans to counterfeit these beads. And then the costliness, it must take a lot of time or effort or both in order to produce that monetary medium. And so, like the rice stones and Yap is a good example. In order to produce one of these stones, you know, it would take, if I remember correctly, it would take you know, 2 or 3 villagers many months to produce one rice stone. And so, you know, it really comes back down to the scarcity. Money needs to be scarce. And so if it's easy to produce, it just doesn't make a good money. And that's because money basically is a claim, if you will, on all of the world's existing real wealth. Money isn't really wealth, it's just a claim on wealth. And so, like, if it's going to be a claim on the real wealth, you can't really have it inflated or easily, you know, changing the monetary supply, basically. And so, you know, Bitcoin, I think, is the you know, most interesting way to demonstrate through proof of work, basically, the unforgeable costliness. And you know, I think it all basically kind of boils down to the mathematics of SHA-256. Which is the hashing algorithm used in the proof of work. How robust is that system? I mean, it seems pretty robust, and analyzing it from a mathematical level is pretty straightforward. So, you know, so long as that maintains credibility, that hashing function, you know, I think it's very likely that Bitcoin, you know, continues to maintain its 21 million supply cap. And considering that it'll be the hardest money in terms of hardest to produce money that humanity has ever had. And so I think, you know, and if you look at any money, basically, you need to kind of understand that money in terms of its unforgeable costliness. And especially when a money loses its credibility or deflates, it all comes down to whether or not that money has unforgeable costliness.
And Derek, I guess off that, I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are. We mentioned with the rice stone example, it was a big technological breakthrough that resulted in the debasement of the rice stones. What are your thoughts on the potential for quantum computing, you know, having an issue as far as being able to kind of break the code?
Yeah, well, you know, I certainly don't claim to be an expert on the quantum computing. I just kind of rely on who I consider to be the experts in this area. and many of them are not concerned. And my understanding is that many of the mechanisms inside of Bitcoin already are quantum resistant, such as the proof of work mechanism. But again, I just don't really know enough about quantum computing to really make a strong defense there.
No, fair enough. Just curious.
Isn't it basically the theory there is that if computers advance quickly enough for quantum computing, so too will the mining and algorithm of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think that's largely true, but in some cases, such as like the proof of work, if there's a quantum attack on the proof of work, that would require a hard fork, which, as you know, in Bitcoin, that's really not something that is regarded as a good upgrade mechanism, because it has the potential to kick people off the network. And but I suppose if there were a major attack or threat to Bitcoin, I think you could easily get the community to engage in a hard fork and change the mining algorithm. But there are consequences to that. There's a massive network effect and a lot of existing ASICs and mining power, and it may be that you have to bootstrap a new mining network essentially. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it does, I think it can be mitigated, certainly, but it wouldn't be without great effort and risk to the network.
No, but I do think we're dialing in on the right parallels to be drawn to the current situation in hand too, because a lot of this that we're learning about, once the ease of production became so simple that there wasn't actually effort into the production of the monetary good, then the value eroded. So a lot of the proof of work versus proof of stake debate kind of hinges on this same type of discussion. A lot of the ESG narrative, which to me is just propaganda, because it's typically spoken from an uninformed perspective that doesn't actually digest how the network operates, and that it's not a energy consumption per transaction, and that the more that the network is embraced, the actual energy expenditure per utilization increment is actually decreased, not increased. So I think that a lot of this does play into that debate, but we'll see too, as we touch on all the other monetary instruments from primitive times too, they continue. I think everybody should just make a mental note that stock to flow is ultimately the issue that they either live or die on. So in a couple weeks we're going to get into, next week we get into monetary metals. The week after that we'll get into post Bretton Woods and the erosion of fiat money and this fiat experiment that we're in right now. But there's a lot of parallels to be drawn to when a currency, I don't know, maybe has 40% of its M1 supply printed within an 18-month span, almost like the price of steaks and burgers and gas and houses and everything else seems to go up by, I don't know, what are we at, 7.5%, was it, that we're seeing currently? So the price of all goods should double every 8 years, 7 to 9 years at the current rate. It would almost seem like we have a stock to flow problem in our current monetary system. So we'll dive into that in a couple weeks. But just make some mental notes and put a pin in it as we touch on all these other things that have been used as monetary instruments in the history of time, and how many of them all ultimately failed on the issue of stock to flow. That as soon as the stock to flow had become compromised, the validity of and the viability of that monetary instrument died. So I mean, we had that with the beads. I'll pause for a minute in case anybody else wanted to touch on the agri beads or the Yap Island stuff. But after that, I can get into a few of the other examples just to kind of show how repetitive this cycle was. But it's fairly lather, rinse, repeat. There's a system that seems to work until it doesn't, and at the point that it doesn't, it's typically a stock to flow problem. And that stock to flow problem is typically introduced by some type of a technological breakthrough, whether it be the ships that were capable of the ships and the explosives that O'Keefe had to be able to produce more of the rye stones at a much easier way and deliver them, or the agri beads being able to reproduce the glass beads in Europe and then slowly introduce them into the African economy to the point where they bled them out of all of their wealth and ultimately all of their people. Not to not to dive too deep into a touchy subject, but these agri beads ultimately were referred to as slave beads because a lot of the wealth in Africa had not only to do with its resources in the ground, but it had to do with its resources just in terms of its people. So they were the currency with which slaves were trafficked, and even more African resources got exploited because of the disruption of the stock to flow of the agri beads. So there's an ugly history behind it in that particular case. But I'll pause for a minute in case anybody's got any comments on those two before I move on to some of the other more interesting instances of money throughout primitive history.
It sounds to me like us Europeans are really messing up paradise for other places. I'm trying to simplify things a little bit here. I know that when I first heard the term stock to flow, I was a little shaky on it. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but high stock to flow essentially implies that something is extremely hard to produce. You can't make something fast enough in order to debase the whole value, right? You saw that with the rhinestones. You saw that with the beads until the white man came, or the technology came to disrupt that. And it may not be just, producing or manufacturing these. Well, I guess you could spin the term produce, but, the next example, which would be seashells. They're not technically producing them, they're finding them. They're scarce, which is different. But Michael, I'll let you pick up from there unless others want to talk about this. But high stock to flow means things are hard to produce. Low stock to flow means things are easy to produce and disrupt easier. So
right, I think it's another one of those terms that it's difficult to have it come intuitively and to kind of grok that knowledge. But just like time preference, we work through that just bit by bit. I think you explained it well. So yeah, a high stock to flow. Basically, the increase in flow is the danger. So the increase in flow relative to the stock. So if you've got any fraction, basically, if you're increasing the denominator rapidly, then you are reducing that ratio. So the stock would be the total supply. The flow would be how much new production could be introduced. So yeah, you're aiming for a high stock to flow, high relative stock to low flow, and then the increase of flow, especially rapidly. In so doing, dropping the stock to flow ratio is usually the death nail for a currency. So seashells, like you mentioned, the next thing to kind of tap into, seashells have been used throughout history. They were used in North America, Africa, Asia. There's a ton of historical accounts of how seashells were used, and they were the ones that were the most saleable were the ones that were scarcer and harder to find. So it was kind of like a collectible in that the rarity and the uniqueness of the seashell kind of derived its value. I kind of think of it akin to the way like baseball cards and some collectibles would derive their value from a period of history, or you have different type of gemstones that are judged based on size, color, clarity, things like that. So the ones that were the most unique and the hardest to find and the most scarce had the most value. We talk about Native Americans and Europeans that used wampum shells, and a lot of these had the same use case as agri beads. They were hard to find. They had super high stock to flow, and they probably had the highest stock to flow of all the durable goods at the time, and they were attractive. They like we've continued to touch upon, they were desirable in and of themselves, and that gave birth to them as a monetary use. But because they were so different, as I mentioned a little bit with the agri beads, they introduced a very large obstacle to the growth of any economy, because you didn't have like multiplicable scale. You couldn't necessarily use them as uniform monetary instruments because they were so specialized and so different and so unique from one to the next. So that makes it difficult for any economy to kind of grow using that kind of a monetary union. But how did seashells end? You fast forward to the end of that story, as boats and technologies for navigating the seas advanced, then they were able to harvest seashells from deeper into the sea. The supply was very highly inflated. They were able to, acquire these seashells at a faster rate and get even more ones that had previously been rare because they could reach deeper places that they couldn't reach before, and ultimately dropped their value and lost their salability across time. So by the 1600s, I think it was 1661, seashells were no longer used by legal tender, used as legal tender anywhere, and then they lost all monetary function. So one thing that we'll see throughout history, and that's why we're going to dive into monetary metals next week, but any society in the history of the world that used seashells, and they were pretty commonly used across the world, every society that had the option and the ability metallurgically to convert to metal coins did so. And they ultimately benefited from those switches. So with the Industrial Revolution, you really quickly had fossil fuel powered boats. It was easier to scour the sea and acquire these seashells, and ultimately just nuked the stock to flow model and dropped the stock to flow ratio so quickly that seashells pretty much failed across the planet rapidly and fairly consistently as far as the time period in history. So, Floki, I'll kick it back to you. Or sorry, Derek, I see you've got your hand raised. Go for it. And then I've got a couple other just kind of interesting monetary units and ways that we've applied them to modern day that I'll touch on at the end to kind of bring it full circle. But go for it, Derek.
Sure. I just wanted to make a quick point. You mentioned earlier regarding the glass beads and how the Europeans colonized and confiscated basically all of the real property in these African nations, and you called them slaves, and in many ways that's exactly right. And I just want to point out to people, and this is sometimes a little uncomfortable to think about, but this current situation in which we live, we live in a situation where fiat money is costless to produce, right? It has no unforgeable costliness. It is literally, they just update a centralized database and there's more reserves in the system and more money, base money.
Audio cut out, or is everyone else out?
Oh, no, I heard you, Obiwan.
I could hear things loud and clear.
Yeah, so in any case, I just wanted to kind of point out that they can inflate the money supply extremely easy, and they can they can tax the money because a lot of our money is in intermediaries, banks, and oftentimes it's taxed even before we get it. And so I just want to point out that in many ways we are slaves in a certain sense. We're working all day for this monetary medium, the dollar, depending on where you are, of course. And to what extent, are we slaves under that system? We don't often think of ourselves as slaves today, but in some ways we are. What percentage of your wealth, I think the meme goes, is it when you're not a slave? Is it 1% or 5% or 50%? So I just want people to think about that a little bit. And the great thing is that we have Bitcoin now, and if you continue to operate under the fiat system, or you hold fiat reserves or as your reserve, you are a willing victim, and you are essentially a willing slave in some ways.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid the whole "you got to do what you got to do" thing, and I think that's why we're all here, is try to get out of that system.
Sorry, Floki, looks like you're having some mic issues again there, so I'll just hop in real quick. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and it's obviously always an uncomfortable topic, but I get the parallels that you're trying to make there. To dive back in and just kind of finish the other ideas or the other forms of primitive monies that I thought were interesting. Cattle. Nobody thinks of cattle as money, and nobody really, outside of certain cultures, nobody realizes that cattle is still used as money today. But cattle at the time were, dating back in history, they were cherished for nutritional value. So that was the original reason that people wanted them. And, to continue to beat that dead horse, no pun intended, it was always something that was desired for some reason that then found a different purpose as a monetary medium. But cattle were saleable across space because they were mobile. They're still used today in societies that use them for payments as dowries. But they also came with their own problems, so they weren't really divisible. So a lot of times when cattle were used as money in primitive cultures, they were also accompanied by salt. And we get a lot of financial terms from salt, including salability, salary. Everybody gets their salary, right? The sal portion of the word salary is from the Latin for salt. Pecuniary, which is another financial term, comes from pecus, which is the Latin word for cattle. So cattle and salt in combination was also a monetary instrument, which I think is another one of that's right up there with the Yap Island system to me as far as the more interesting ones. But ultimately, they were supplanted by things that worked better. Metals ultimately proved to be a better medium of exchange because they were uniform and highly valuable, and the units could be smaller and they could be moved around more easily. So, in that regard, the technology of the monetary metals ultimately helped supplant the cattle. So the cattle wasn't necessarily a stock to flow, but it still was a technological breakthrough that made the practicality of cattle and salt as money kind of fall off. So just Ross, I see you got your hands up. I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, and something I kind of wanted to toss out there as food for thought as well is, regardless of whether or not you're a full-on digital native or you're still in the fiat system at all, it's important to keep in mind that the whole notion of money is to humans, but at the end of the day, the notion of contracts, which is essentially what money is, it's a contract of exchange, is a learned behavior, and regardless of which side you adopt as far as how to avoid the debasement, it's at the end of the day it's really about risk mitigation. What helps you sleep well at night by mitigating your risk, whether it's going full digital native or keeping some in fiat, just whatever it takes for you to sleep well at night. Because as far as the concept of money being a learned behavior, surprisingly, I mean, the token reward systems can be taught to animals. And interestingly enough, they will make similar mistakes in judgment as far as, maximizing their reward and payoff. So just because you're full on digital native, all that's part of being the risk mitigation strategy. It doesn't absolve anybody of any risk as far as the decision making, as far as maximizing actual returns or payoff. And so I just kind of wanted to toss that out there as well as we kind of discuss some of these things.
Sure. So Obi, I really wanted to kind of come to you. I was curious to get your take, because I think out of the entire panel, you're probably the deepest into the altcoin side of the pool. You're the least Bitcoiny probably of the bunch. So how do you digest this kind of information in terms of how it relates to proof of stake? Do you see vulnerabilities in proof of stake because there's really no barrier to creation of new supply? From a difficulty perspective, other than something that maybe is artificially or algorithmically created, or what's your overall application of the lessons learned here to proof of stake as you see it?
I mean, there's lots of different flavors of network build. Proof of work, proof of stake, being the two most common, but it's the similar concept. It depends on the tokenomics in terms of the stock to flow or the inflationary mechanisms, but it all involves some form of like Ross was saying, it's a contract, right? If you're going to exchange one valuable thing for another and do it in a trustless, public ledger way, then there's really no fundamental difference between what you would see on Bitcoin or another network that has a basic unit of account, saleable, transferable, divisible, all those properties of money that we have pinned above. So it comes down to, picking networks that have better principles than others will be more valuable than ones that have a very high supply. Ones that have an inflation to infinity supply aren't really all that different than a fiat currency, really. I mean, it's, a shared social construct that unit of measure is valuable. And the people that participate in that network or hold that asset and believe that it will be valuable is how the value is derived, right? Same way, like if everybody decided tomorrow that Bitcoin had no value and stopped purchasing it, then the value would plummet. So it all comes down to what humans determine to be valuable and what serves as that good social contract between one another. Proof of stake is, the more commonly used one at the moment because of ESG concerns, right? Energy usage, which I do believe are a bit overblown in terms of Bitcoin. So there's a lot of different pros and cons, I would say. I don't know if that answered exactly what you were asking, but both network technologies and consensus methods have their pros and cons.
Yeah, I think just for me, proof of stake to me is too similar to the fiat system that we're trying to replace. In that, I have yet to see a compelling case where it's not just a technological version of he who has the biggest stack determines what the truth is. So that's where it falls off for me. And I know that you're quite educated on the topic and you don't speak from a point of maximalism or tribalism. So I was curious to just get your take on that side of the world, since it's not one that I typically find resonates with me.
It really comes down to the tokenomic structure of what the basic unit account of that network is. So you could have really strong, dare I say, even sounder monetary principles than Bitcoin when it comes to something like an e-gold or a Luna that would, have a volatile, scarce asset that becomes scarcer over time. Truly deflationary with, a hard theoretical cap, but, in practice, it's deflationary, where you can actually, in the case of Luna, for example, you can have, fees paid in local denominations of currency, and it makes it easily accessible in terms of a barrier of entry for people all around the world to participate, because they can pay in local currency. And then if fiat currencies collapse, you can pin any kind of value or a stable coinage system to anything, right? You could, if they decided to shift from dollars to seashells again, they could. That could be created. Luna, or excuse me, e-gold, right? That has a fixed supply of 31.4 million, 20.4 million circulated. At a point in time, the network transaction fees take over the majority of the transactions on the network. Basically, the value exchanged from the transaction fees exceed what the token issuance is. The token issuances cease. And so you would cap that supply around what you would see in Bitcoin. And the supply is all going to be out there, even if it hit its theoretical maximum within 10 years. So there are shorter time frames in that kind of a stock to flow. And, you could argue more fairly distributed, and it's carbon negative. So there, like I said, there are networks out there that have a lot of very strong cases versus the dominant proof of work side of the house. But I would say, because they are large in numbers and because not every network's economy is set up in a similar fashion, that not all of them are created equal in terms of store of value.
Ross, I see your mic open there. Do you have some thoughts? Maybe not.
Or he's having the Twitter bug that we all seem to be experiencing tonight. But hopefully that made sense. It looks like Michael might have gone down too. But yeah, there are a lot of proof of stake. There are a lot of graphs out there. There are a lot of different types and flavors of networks. There are some that even meld, proof of stake elements with graph elements. So it really comes down to knowing the technology and the economics or tokenomics of what it is that you're buying into, and the soundness of those principles and how that money translates.
Michael, testing 1, 2. Are you back? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I think you might have to. Oh.
He said on the Discord there that he's having glitches. Might be back.
Check 1, 2.
Gotcha. Welcome back.
Nice. Yeah, sorry. Twitter's just been incredibly glitchy tonight. Like for me right now, it shows me that Derek is speaking. So I hope I'm not talking over him.
No, Derek's not speaking. If you want to resume, I just kind of, answered the question that I think you were asking. So you can.
Yeah, Floki, I'm gonna ask if I can take it back to you, and if you could drive the boat for a little bit here. I'm still having some technical glitches. I'm gonna try to work through and then get myself back set up.
Sure. Yeah, we could kind of fill this in a little bit with some community stuff, or we can talk about some of the things that we're going to look forward to that tie into this conversation for next week. Derek, I see your hand up. Let's go ahead with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would like to hear some commentary from the audience, so maybe after my comment here, we can do that. But I did want to bring up one.
Looks like the Twitter gods are really messing with us tonight. Derek,
Yeah.
you there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Derek, but I think
I can hear you. I can hear you, Derek.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I think I mentioned this on our previous meeting before this, but in tribal nations, there a lot of times what would happen is this kind of goes back to the unforgeable costliness thing, is that there, and I think it was mentioned, someone mentioned dowries earlier. What would happen is that there would be a lot of jewelry that would be made, and a lot of this jewelry would be extremely difficult to produce, and it wouldn't be transferred very often, so it wouldn't be used as a medium of exchange very often. But what it would be used as is like a generational type of wealth, and these types of jewelry, it could be necklaces that were made of animal bones, or certain types of stones that were found. They were extremely rare in those societies, and so they served as a good mechanism or a good store of value. And so whenever there was a marriage, or maybe there was a large transfer of property, these jewelry would just be transferred as a store of value. Now, the jewelry never became a widespread medium of exchange because they weren't fungible typically. But I did want to mention that because it kind of points to the fact that certain monies, especially emerging monies, start out primarily as a store of value. So people hold on to them for long-term savings, basically, and they don't use it in a transactional way. And so oftentimes when people are complaining about Bitcoin not being a transactional medium or not being used for transactions, it's due to the fact that it is an emerging money, and it's undergoing this phased adoption where money first becomes a store of value. Now, of course, it has to be transferable. So Bitcoin is transferable on the Base network, obviously, but certainly more so on the Lightning network. But the fact is when something is being monetized or being adopted as a form of money, people don't really want to transfer it, right? You want to save something like that because it's gaining in value over time. And now people will transfer it because they, need to meet their needs. Maybe they need food, or maybe they need to buy a house or whatever. And human time on Earth is limited, so you can't just hold on to these things forever. But I think it is an important point to just recognize that money does go through phases of adoption, first as a store of value, then eventually as a medium of exchange, where it's used in common daily transactions. And then after that point, it becomes a unit of account in which all goods and services are expressed in money terms, or in the terms of that form of money. Now, the necklaces would never become something like that because they lack certain monetary properties like fungibility and other things, but collectibles like that were discussed on Shelling Out by Nick Szabo. It's an article, very long, but extremely interesting for those who are interested in this kind of thing. Definitely worth a read if you need to go to sleep one night. So I just wanted to mention that, and I'll pass it off to whoever else.
Since we're on the topic of what is money a little bit, like we were on last week, I did do a follow-up pin, which I posted just now, if anybody wants to look at it. But the properties of money, there's fungibility, right? So how is it interchangeable? Is it divisible into units? Is it portable? How durable is it? What security does it have? The more scarce it is, the more valuable, going back to stock to flow. And then there's some more modern monetary properties of money, like non-sovereignty or state independence. So, private money in the terms of what we're talking about with crypto, censorship resistance. So, having some peer-to-peer decentralized trustless network affords that, which isn't necessarily the case, like with what Aldo was talking about with what's going up in Canada right now. And then making it smart or programmable, which is unique to digital money. And that is something that, is one thing that is the technology evolution of money that we're seeing with digital assets, that, just like with the stones and seashells moving on to cattle and salt, moving on to precious metals and coinage. Really, from there we moved into paper notes and currency, which usually was backed by that metal, and then now we're evolving into digital property and money. So it's just kind of the natural evolution of what we use to transmit value. So, Floki, do we want to open the floor for questions if anyone wants to raise a hand or come up or ask any questions about either last week's lesson or this one?
You're the only voice that I could actually hear on the whole panel right now. So maybe if you want to manage that, it's just tough because Twitter seems to be having a tough time right now. So we may just want to close it up because of technical difficulties and wrap it up. But if anybody wants to try and ask something or has anything on their mind while we have these last 20 minutes, we're going to do our best here to make it happen. So anyone?
So in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a mic button. You can just hit that button to request a mic and come up and ask a question.
Hey, Mike, are you back?
I think I am.
I can hear you.
Great. We just went through the properties of money, and we're getting into the Q&A portion because of the technical difficulties. We're going to see if we have any questions that can be answered, or if they can't, we'll put it on the docket for future AMAs. But feel free, no question is too elementary or too advanced. Whatever you're curious about, go ahead and ask. There's lots of different backgrounds and experiences, so we probably have an answer.
Yeah, definitely. And sorry about that. The Twitter's just been unmanageable tonight with its glitches, and sorry for how that's possibly disrupted the content. As far as I understand, airborne stream should be pretty solid, but a lot of us up here the entire night have had a difficulty either hearing each other or hearing ourselves or knowing if we're talking. So bear with us. We're working through some technical glitches and just trying to communicate via back channels to make sure that we're still putting something out there that's intelligible for everybody. But if we've got anybody that wants to come up and ask a question, please by all means come participate. The last couple of weeks we've kind of run long on content, so we haven't gotten to the traditional AMA portion of the AMA. So Pablo, what's up, bud?
Hey, how you guys doing this evening?
Good. What you got?
Hey, it's more of a statement than a question, but my daughter in 2 days turns 10, and so in my mind, like, just time just flies by so fast, and she's growing so big, and it just in my mind, your parents will probably never hear you guys talk about crypto, and I just wanted to say how proud I am of you guys. Like, just listening to you guys speak was inspirational, and I know that they would be proud. Like, so my heart is just in a really like emotional spot right now, because I just think of my kid, and I know that your parents would be proud of you. I know if my kid was talking like you guys are talking and educating and just being available for the community and just putting out this knowledge weekly, daily, like, they'd be so proud of you guys. So I just wanted to give a shout out to you guys for doing that.
Thanks for that. Much appreciated. It's nice too to kind of see the results. I touched on it last week, but I work with kids on financial literacy, and we're finally at that time of year where I get to teach the course again this year. So I just started this year's course yesterday, and I'm teaching it again tomorrow. It's fun to see those kids kind of mature from 1 year to the next too. So it kind of goes both ways. So there's the parental side of it, but also the passing the knowledge down to kids is helpful. And this is kind of unique since we've started these spaces to do some adult ed on the topic, because I've always kind of geared it more towards kids, or really the only other adult ed has always been with friends or small groups. So this has been kind of a gratifying way to contribute to the community and make sure that everybody is as well informed with knowledge as they possibly can be. Derek, I see you got your hand up, and then we've got Cryptoaddict that joined the panel as a speaker. So Derek, what do you got?
Sure. I just want to mention, I appreciate that comment prior. I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin, of course, and the reason I'm so passionate about all of these topics is really it's all about liberty for me. Bitcoin I view as the most effective way to achieve liberty in our lifetimes, and that's my primary motivation. I just want to see the world. I want to see every individual live in this world as an autonomous human being without having some overlord dictate to them what they need to do, and have an effective means to save, to earn for themselves, to save the fruits of their labor, and if they so choose, pass that on to their children. And these are very kind of simple things to think about, but we kind of live in a world right now under fiat where that's extremely difficult, and so that's why I'm passionate about it, because it's about liberating individuals from the clutches of parasitism or authoritarianism in a lot of ways, and this is the fight for liberty, basically.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad that this platform gives you an ability to kind of elucidate that for many out there, because I think that a lot of people get lost in the tribalism of the space and think that it's just this finger pointing, like, my investment's better than yours, and a lot of Bitcoiners don't necessarily see it from that perspective. And I know that you are a Bitcoin maxi, but a lot of other folks that see the toxicity in the space don't necessarily understand kind of the catalyst is that for many on the Bitcoin side, it came to be as like a protectionist measure for those that went through the block size wars and everything in 2017, and that maximalism kind of came out of necessity, but it wasn't because of a protection. But it was because of defending this psychology, this kind of fundamental belief in what Bitcoin could achieve. It really ultimately didn't boil down to an investment for many people. So
I see we've got a bunch of other speakers on here, so let's go to Cryptoaddict next. I see we've got hands raised, and I'll come to you guys in the order that we brought you up. So Cryptoaddict, what you got?
I appreciate you. So I want to preface this by saying, so I have 3 kids, and they all have their own MetaMask wallet. So my question is going to be pertaining, what can we do to as a late 30s guy? This is my financial independence is cryptocurrency. December 2020, my life changed, but my wife's actually Palauan, so I've had these conversations about Yap. Being a Palauan, they grew up in Yap very, very closely, and my mother-in-law used to work there. And still to this day, those stones hold value, as in they're passed down generationally, and generational wealth when it comes to owning those stones. There's even a family that owns the stone that it's in the ocean, and they collectively, as a people, hold value still to this day. And that, every time you go down this cryptocurrency, you read the Bitcoin standard and you read about Yap. And I just think that's really awesome that you guys brought this up in this space, because I feel ties to Yap and Palau. And I actually have pictures of my mother-in-law standing with those stones. So it's amazing. When it comes to you guys talking about teaching my kids' generation, because they're going to take over, they're going to flip this blockchain stuff on its lid. What would you say is, besides putting a MetaMask in their hand and kind of helping them do transactions, what's something else you guys think I can empower my kids' generation, and they can talk to their friends, and besides NFTs and the cryptocurrency route I'm already taking?
Build a node with them. I'm on
node as a service, or like a strong block node?
Like build a Bitcoin node with them. Like order a Raspberry Pi and a micro SD card and a solid state drive, and for under $250, it's a STEM project that probably surpasses anything that they could do in school. That actually has a function that they could understand a bit of the mechanics of how the hardware comes together, and then to see it communicate on the network. And there's different kind of GUIs that are more intuitive, that aren't really command line based, that they can kind of see the fun of it. I've got 2 kids myself that are both elementary school aged, and I built a node I've built a couple nodes with them. It's something that's simple, that's hands-on, that gets their interest in something that they're interested in, which is like computers and turning screws, and they don't necessarily realize that it's a learning activity. And then once they actually get to build it and then run it, then you can kind of dovetail into teaching them some of the applications. And there's a lot of DIY stuff that you could do, particularly in the Bitcoin network with self-custody, like building a seed signer or 3D printing some components if you had access to a 3D printer. But I found that their level of engagement with some of the hands-on things that aren't just academia was a great way to get them engaged. And then from there, build on that interest once they have it. So once you get their attention with something tangible, then you could get into a little bit more of the academic aspects. But there are also some good books out there that are targeted at kids. I would recommend Bitcoin. God, I gotta look at it. It's written by the Bitcoin rabbi, and he uses it in a Jewish school that I think he's the dean of or the principal of. But it's about a little city called Bitville, I think, running on Bitcoin money. I'll look up the exact title for you here, and I'll try to pin it to the spaces.
I appreciate that.
And then the other thing that I would highly recommend is a game called Shamory. Depending on the age of your kids, I would go one of 2 directions or both. Shamory is great for younger kids because it's like the game of memory with a deck of cards that's analog and played at a table, with family. But it replicates the Bitcoin mining process and how blockchains work, and even including like nonces and 51% attacks and things like that. And then the other game would be called Bitopoly. And Bitopoly is invented by the creator of Fold, or the Fold app, or Fold Debit Card, if anybody's familiar with the Bitcoin back debit card. I think it was the first of its kind. But it's a great Bitcoin forward company, and his whole kind of life's work has been to gamify the Bitcoin experience to get people in the door. And he has done that in a number of ways. So he has gamified the spending of fiat via this Fold debit card, that every time you spend in fiat, you get to spin a little wheel on your phone to determine a Bitcoin reward back. He's created an augmented reality game within that, where you kind of like Pokemon Go, where you go around
and see things in AR and search things out. But instead of finding Pokemon, you find you find sats and things that are ways to interact with the Fold app. But then he also invented this game called Bitopoly, which was like a card-based version of a Bitcoiner's Monopoly. So those are both fun family activities. And I see that in the Discord, Cryptoaddict Fake has saved me. So it's called Bitcoin Money is the book that I was referring to. Bitcoin Money: A Tale of Bitfill Discovering Good Money. And it was written by Michael Karras, who goes by the pseudonym Bitcoin Rabbi. So I'll pause a minute in case anybody else on the panel has ways that they've kind of engaged with their kids. But I find that book to be the best. There are a few other books that are a bit patronizing and really just kind of cash grabs. That one is a bit academic for what it is, but it's also the most thorough if you're trying to actually educate and not just read them a bedtime story.
No, and the kids, so 14, 11, and 9, they're growing up in the Minecraft. They're already trading NFTs because that's what they've been doing their whole lives. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, hit me up via DM too. I'd be happy to help. I've talked to a bunch of other people too about ways that they've introduced their kids and things that I've done. So it's definitely a fun way to introduce them. I mean, my son just wanted a Bitcoin birthday cake for his birthday that recently passed. He's into it. So I found that building in the node, though, the hands-on stuff in the games to be the best way to get their interest. And then once you've got their interest, then they start to learn about it. All right. So next up, we've got Mr. Fantastic and then Kronos.
I was just going to say, like 5 minutes ago, since the AMA started, the reception has been very clear. Then Michael came in and it was kind of broken up, but the last couple minutes with Michael have been better.
Well, thanks for that. We're fighting the bugs here, but we're trying to make it work. Kronos, welcome back to the panel. Haven't seen you in a bit.
Hey, thank you very much, guys. No, I wanted to basically second what Derek was stating, and I think one of the items that all of us collectively need to stay vigilant on is government action. When government tries to pass laws that are unfavorable because some people are trying to block it or essentially delay the inevitable, I think collectively all of us, one, should really consider holding assets that you believe in. Most importantly, contact your local representatives and stay on their case about what is it, do they understand, do they not understand, what is it that they're doing, and help to educate them and guide them into making smarter decisions for digital assets, because that's paramount. We know this year is going to be a little bit rocky with regulations and such, but we really need to stay focused into what they're doing. That's just my takeaway and some of my observations of what I've seen over the past 2 years. Thanks.
Sure thing. Thanks for coming up. Floki, we got you back?
Yellow. Testing 1, 2.
Got you loud and clear.
Cool. If there isn't anyone else coming up for a comment or a question, I guess we shall go around the panel and do final thoughts. Yes? Or maybe, Michael, why don't you tell us what we have to look forward to next week in terms of, the next phase of this discussion and empires, the rise and fall of, monetary metals and so on and so forth.
So yeah, so next week we'll be getting into, as we said, monetary metals, and monetary metals come in many shapes and sizes. So it's not just the simplicity of gold and silver bars, but also the use of coinage, and then some of the ways that those have been either used successfully or unsuccessfully, the ways that they have been manipulated, corrupted along the way, and the way that such uses or misuses led to either the rise or fall of civilizations throughout history, going back to ancient Rome, and there are a ton of instances throughout history just in the monetary metals side of monetary history that are fascinating, and to understand how the success and failure of the currency was directly connected to the success and failure of the empires that we learned. We learned about the empires, and we learned about it from a different historical bent, but nobody ever covered the direct ties to the money and the success and failure thereof. So that's what we're getting into next week. Looking forward to it. And just one other thing as we go around tonight, I want to make sure that when we get back to Frank, he had a point on CBDCs that came up in the Discord chat that hopefully if he's still awake on there, maybe he can bring that point up as the final thought, because it's a very valid risk of CBDCs that many people don't often touch upon. So
Yeah, I'm a few drinks in, but the point that I was trying to make with CBDC is that you can quickly, if you deduce how it would set up and kind of the game theory behind it, you can quickly deduce that like human reaction or interaction with it would be that you would have a much higher time preference. And what do I mean by that is essentially, say with the stimulus that was given during the height of the pandemic, the $1,200 a month or whatever it was, a lot of people spent that money, but a lot of people also saved it, which was exactly what the government didn't want you to do. Now, converting, the cuck bucks or the fiat into a kind of a digital currency, you essentially can control that even more so by saying, okay, if you don't spend this money within 1 week, 2 weeks, we'll just take it back. So you can see how this can basically, again, make you have high time preference and not become a saver. And we just get into this kind of tailspin of an inflationary system where, the dollar, let's say the dollar would just become worthless. You'd have kind of Venezuela 2.0. So that was kind of the point that I wanted to make earlier. And hopefully I made it this time around.
Thank you, Frankie. So for the last question of the night, we have a newcomer, Rob. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Over here in Arizona. So I've listened to the whole thing, and it's like the second time I listened to you guys, and you guys are beyond knowledgeable, and I look forward to listening to you guys more. My question is, someone said something about Bitcoin being hard money, and there's a cap supply, and it's the anatomy of it makes it so hard to recreate. And I don't know who said that, but if you could speak a little bit more on that, I'd appreciate that. And if you want to do it now or you're going to do it later, that's cool.
Maybe we could do go ahead, Derek. I was just going to say, maybe we could do a quick summary, and then if we need to elaborate, we could, talk on the side. Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, I think that may have been me talking about that. So, I guess the ultimate question is, is Bitcoin scarce, and how do you prove that Bitcoin is actually scarce? And the method in which that happens is that the node software that you download, it is every single Bitcoin full node is got it hardwired in there to check every single block to make sure that every single block that is produced is only producing a specific amount of units per block, given that particular epoch, that 4-year halving epoch. And these nodes, they only consider these blocks to be valid if they have a certain proof of work attached to them. And, in order to produce this block and be awarded new money, you have to expend extreme amounts of energy in order to be rewarded with that new money. And so that gets back to that idea of unforgeable costliness. In order to be a money, it has to be costly in order to produce. And so with regard to Bitcoin, that process is called proof of work. It's unforgeable in the sense that it uses a mathematical proof, SHA 256 basically. If you look at the SHA 256, the proof of work needs or must start with a certain amount of leading zeros. And, you know, so this process of mining, they're just searching for some random number out there such that the the result of this SAW operation results in a number such that there are a lot of leading zeros in there. And that process basically, in combination with the fact that nodes are checking every step of the way, leads to the fact that there's only going to be a limited number. I hope that answered your question. I'm not exactly sure, but hopefully.
Yes. Yeah, I will reach out to you maybe later and go from there. But thank you so much, everyone. I'll jump off.
Yeah, feel free to DM me if you'd like. I'm happy to talk about it with you.
All right, one more. Can't help it, huh? Callan, what's going on, man?
Hello, what's up?
Thanks for joining. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm a friend of Rob in real life, and I saw he was in this space, so I figured I'd hop in and see what you guys are talking about.
Callan, oh my gosh, good to hear from you, man. I feel like this is like your home.
Yeah, well, you know, I found your what you guys are saying very interesting. You know, what is money? It's a very fascinating topic. I'll be honest, guys. You know, I do like crypto, but recently, you know, I've gone really into gold. I've got the gold bug. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think you're gonna have to tune in for next week. Sounds like it, huh, Michael?
Yeah, I think Opie kind of foreshadowed his opinion of gold last week. If you want to catch out the recording, but yeah, next week we're going to get into monetary metals. So this week was primitive monies, and then next week will be an entire episode on monetary metals. So tune in.
I will.
Right on. And I think with that, it is time to go around the panel and get the good nights and goodbyes and final thoughts. I'm just gonna, go to the right here. Obi-Wan, why don't you kick this off and say goodnight to everyone?
Oh, sure. No, thanks again for another episode and the lesson of monetary history. I'm looking forward to next week with metals, and then potentially getting into some empires rising and falling and fiat currencies and all sorts of fun stuff. I did want to call out a shout out that TerraSpace is in the house in here doing the recording, and we've had a lot of technical difficulties, and they have this magic voodoo that they perform to really kind of clean up the audio in spaces, and sometimes you can't even tell the technical difficulties happened. So if you haven't checked them out, go to terraspaces.org. They do a good job of recording not only just Terra based content, but they also record a lot of the Voyager content and amongst others. So just wanted to give them a shout out as one of our recording friends. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Derek.
Thanks for having me, guys, tonight. I really enjoyed the conversation. Again, I'm the organizer of Old City Bitcoiners. We have a meetup tomorrow in St. Augustine. If you're in the area, we'd love to have you out there. And as always, we also appreciate you sharing with your friends or family or interested friends that might be in the area. Let them know about it and come out and talk some Bitcoin. And I'll also point you to our website, which I just checked is down at the moment. I'll work on making sure that's up shortly, but it follows what's called the Bitcoin value for value model, or what I like to call the digital patronage model, where if you find value in the content that is produced, you can just simply leave a micro tip. So it is Lightning enabled, and you can leave as little as a penny US dollar. And it's just kind of a really cool example of a micro blogging type of situation. Check it out if you get a chance. Again, the site's not up, but I'll work on getting that up shortly. And I appreciate everyone having me. Thank you.
Michael, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the people that come out each week and the turnout. We don't really chase audience numbers, but it's nice to hit a little bit of validation to see folks come in and stay through the whole thing. So it kind of validates that we're heading in the right direction, and we'll continue to try to send more of these kind of scripted content pieces your way and piece together the pieces of education that we
So Mike is having some mic issues. So Michael, if you could hear me, why don't you go ahead and type what you're going to say in Discord, and we'll translate that for you because you are having mic issues and we can't hear anything you're saying. Aldo, why don't you go ahead and pick it up?
Yeah, great discussion. Thanks to everyone on the panel that contributed. I love the walk through history and learning about all the primitive monies and all the monetary systems that have been utilized throughout history and some of the pitfalls associated with them. I'm personally looking forward to the empires section. I know Floki is all about that stuff, and I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, stay tuned, folks. We're gonna have a lot of interesting historical content, and yeah, I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Frankie, why don't you go ahead and say goodnight to everyone?
Okay, guys. Thank you again. This is a great episode 3, and I can't wait till next week.
Thank you, Frankie. Sun Tzu, you want to say anything?
Sure, yeah. It looks like most of the people here are familiar faces, but if it's your first time or you're unfamiliar with us, as you can see, our group is called VGX Heroes. And based on our discussion here tonight, you can probably tell we are not VGX Maxis. So feel free to drop us a follow or join our Discord server, because there's a lot of conversation like this going on in there. A lot of other nice people to talk to. So I think I will leave it at that. I'm going to grab some snacks and probably settle in for the night.
Right on. Well, I got a message from Michael, and he says, "Screw Twitter, night night." So, thank you guys all for coming. Thanks to the whole panel going across Sun Tzu, Obi-Wan, Derek, Michael, Aldo, Ross, who took off, and Frankie, and Mr. Fantastic, Kronos, and all the other guest speakers who had the courage to come up. Thank you so much. What other little tidbit can I give you? Oh, Donnie Darko, he's leading the Friday Buy Ritual, so be sure to check that out. And like Aldo was saying, very excited for next week. And with that, I'm just going to say it. Strength and honor, and have a great night, everybody.
Night all.